The dust clung to Josephine Turner's throat like powdered glass as she stumbled forward, each breath a labor that brought no relief, her vision swimming in the merciless glare of the New Mexico sun that seemed determined to burn away every last drop of moisture from her trembling body. She had lost the wagon train 3 days ago. 3 days that felt like an eternity. 3 days since she had made the foolish decision to chase after her father's pocket watch when it fell from the moving wagon. 3 days since she had watched in horror as the dust cloud carrying her fellow travelers disappeared over the horizon while she frantically searched the scrubland. She had called out until her voice gave way to nothing but a rasping whisper, had tried to follow their trail until the wind shifted and covered every trace of their passage. The year was 1878, and Josephine had been traveling from Missouri to California with a group of settlers seeking new opportunities in the West. At 22 years old, she had been the eldest daughter of a family that had perished in a cholera outbreak the previous winter. The wagon train had been her last hope, her final chance at building something new from the ashes of her old life. Now that hope lay dying in the desert heat, just as surely as she was. Her lips had cracked days ago, thin lines of dried blood marking where the skin had split. Her tongue felt swollen, useless, pressing against teeth that seemed suddenly too large for her mouth. The cotton dress she wore, once a modest powder blue, now hung gray with dust and stained dark with sweat under her arms and down her back. Her bonnet had blown away on the second day, leaving her dark brown hair to hang in tangled strings around her sunburned face. Josephine knew she was dying. She had read enough accounts, heard enough stories around campfires to recognize the signs, the confusion that made her thoughts drift like cottonwood seeds. The way her legs no longer seemed to belong to her body, stumbling over rocks she could clearly see. The burning that had consumed her for the first 2 days had given way to something worse, a creeping coldness that seemed to rise from her very core despite the 100-degree heat. She had stopped sweating entirely. That was the worst sign of all. The landscape stretched endlessly before her, a brutal expanse of red sand, scattered sage, and twisted juniper trees that offered no shade worth seeking. In the distance, mountains rose like broken teeth against the impossibly blue sky, their peaks seeming to mock her with the promise of cooler air she would never reach. A lizard skittered across her path, pausing to regard her with ancient, unblinking eyes before disappearing into a crack between 2 rocks. Josephine's foot caught on something, a root or a stone, and she went down hard on her knees. Pain shot through her legs, but it felt distant, happening to someone else. She tried to push herself back up, but her arms shook with the effort. Tears tried to form in her eyes, but there was no moisture left to create them, just a burning sensation that made her squeeze them shut. This was it then. This was how her story ended, alone in the desert. Her bones to be picked clean by vultures and scattered by coyotes. No one would know what had happened to her. No one would mark her grave or say prayers over her remains. She would simply disappear, as though she had never existed at all. She managed to get to her feet one more time, swaying dangerously as the world tilted and spun. She took one step forward, then another, driven by nothing more than the stubborn refusal to die on her knees. Her father had always said the Turners were too stubborn for their own good. Maybe he had been right. The sound of hoofbeats didn't register at first. Josephine thought it was her pulse, thundering irregularly in her ears, or perhaps the approach of death itself riding across the sand to claim her. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, accompanied now by the creak of leather and the snort of a horse. She tried to turn toward the sound, but her legs chose that moment to give out entirely. She collapsed forward, barely getting her hands up in time to keep her face from smashing into the hard-packed earth. The world narrowed to a tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. Through the haze, she heard a man's voice, urgent and concerned. "Madam?" Madam, can you hear me?" Strong hands gripped her shoulders, turning her gently onto her back. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the merciless sun, and Josephine forced her eyes open to find herself looking up at a man who seemed to have materialized from the desert itself. He was somewhere in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey held up to firelight. Dark hair stuck out from beneath a battered hat, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. Dust coated every inch of him, from his worn leather vest to his faded denim trousers, but it was his expression that caught her attention. Genuine concern creased his brow, and his mouth was set in a tight line of worry. "Jesus," he muttered, taking in her condition. "How long have you been out here?" Josephine tried to answer, but all that emerged was a dry croak. Her throat felt like it had been scraped raw with sandpaper. The cowboy didn't wait for a response. He reached for his belt, where a canteen hung, leather wrapped and weathered with use. Without hesitation, he uncapped it and slid one arm beneath her shoulders, lifting her with surprising gentleness until she was half sitting against his chest. "Slow now," he instructed, his voice a low rumble she could feel through his shirt. "Just small sips, or you will make yourself sick." The first touch of water against her ruined lips was almost painful in its intensity. Josephine whimpered despite herself, but then the cool liquid was flowing into her mouth, and nothing in her entire life had ever tasted so perfect, so pure, so absolutely necessary. She tried to gulp it down, desperate for more, but the cowboy pulled the canteen away. "I said slow," he repeated, though his tone was kind. "Give it a moment to settle, then you can have more." Josephine nodded weakly, the small amount of water already working its way through her system, bringing her thoughts back into sharper focus. She could see him more clearly now, could make out the details of his face. There was a small scar through his left eyebrow, barely visible beneath the brim of his hat. His hands, still supporting her, were calloused and strong, the hands of someone who worked hard for a living. He let her have another sip, then another, carefully monitoring how much she took. "That is all for now," he said after the fourth drink. "Too much too fast and you will just bring it back up. Trust me on that." He capped the canteen and hung it back on his belt, then scooped her up entirely, rising to his feet with a grunt of effort. Josephine wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but they both knew that was a lie. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he carried her toward his horse, a sturdy paint gelding that stood ground-tied a dozen yards away. Getting her onto the horse was an awkward process, but the cowboy managed it with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. He settled her in the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm coming around her waist to hold her steady as she slumped back against his chest. "Town of Abiquiu is about 15 miles northeast," he said, gathering the reins in his free hand. "I can get you there before nightfall if we push it, but that means I need you to stay conscious if you can. Can you do that for me, miss?" Josephine managed a weak nod. Now that she was out of the sun and had some water in her system, the desperate urgency of her situation had faded slightly, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her want nothing more than to close her eyes and sleep for a week. "Good," the cowboy said, and she could hear approval in his voice. "What is your name?" "Josephine," she rasped, her voice still barely functional. "Josephine Turner." "Well, Miss Turner, I am Marcus Quinn, and I'm going to get you somewhere safe." He clicked his tongue, and the paint started forward at a smooth walk. "What in God's name were you doing out here alone?" As they rode, Josephine told him the story in fits and starts, her voice gaining strength as the water continued to work its magic. She told him about the wagon train, about the pocket watch that had been her last connection to her father, about the terrible moment when she had realized she was completely alone. Marcus listened without interrupting, his arm a steady, reassuring presence around her waist. "That pocket watch must have meant a great deal to you," he said when she finished. "It did," Josephine admitted, "but I would trade it 1,000 times over for another drink of water right now." Marcus gave a low chuckle. I can understand that. He paused, and Josephine felt him shift slightly behind her. We will have to ration what is left in the canteen, make it last until we reach town. Something in his tone made Josephine turn her head, trying to see his face. What do you mean? How much is left? Enough, Marcus said, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Don't worry about it. You just focus on staying alert for me. A cold realization washed over Josephine, momentarily pushing back the fog of exhaustion. That was all your water, wasn't it? You gave me all of it. I gave you what you needed, Marcus corrected. There is a difference. But what about you? You will need water too, especially in this heat. I have been through worse, Marcus said, though Josephine noticed how he licked his lips, how his voice had taken on a slightly rougher quality. Besides, I know this territory. I know how to pace myself. You were hours from death when I found you. Maybe less. The water was always yours from the moment I saw you. Josephine felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. This man, this stranger, had given her his only water without a moment's hesitation. In a land where water often meant the difference between life and death, where men had killed for less, Marcus Quinn had handed over his canteen as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Thank you, she whispered, the words feeling inadequate for what he had done. No thanks needed, Marcus replied. Any decent man would have done the same. But Josephine knew that wasn't true. She had seen enough of the world to know that decency was far rarer than it should be, especially out here where the land itself seemed determined to strip away the veneer of civilization and reveal what people truly were beneath. Marcus Quinn had revealed himself to be something special, whether he recognized it or not. They rode in silence for a while, the paint's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, though it was still hours from setting. Josephine could feel the heat radiating from Marcus's body behind her, could hear the way his breathing had become slightly labored. He was suffering from the lack of water, she realized with a pang of guilt. But he said nothing, just kept the horse moving steadily northeast toward Abiquiu. Tell me about yourself, Josephine said, partly to stay awake as he had asked, partly because she genuinely wanted to know more about this man who had saved her life. What brings you out here in the middle of nowhere? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Josephine wondered if he was going to answer. Then he said, I run cattle for a ranch about 30 miles south of Abiquiu. Was supposed to check on some strays that had wandered off from the main herd. Lucky for you, I guess, since nobody else comes through this stretch of country much. Lucky for me indeed, Josephine agreed. Do you live on the ranch? I do. Have a small cabin near the main house. Nothing fancy, but it keeps the rain off my head and the wind out of my bones. He shifted again, and Josephine heard the weariness creeping into his voice despite his attempts to hide it. Been working for the Quinn Ranch going on 5 years now. Quinn? That is your name. Is it your family's ranch? It is. Was my father's before he passed 2 years back. Now it is mine and my younger brother's. Though Jacob does not have much interest in the day-to-day running of things, he is more interested in cards and whiskey than cattle and horses. There was fondness in Marcus's voice despite the criticism. But he is a good man when it counts. Josephine wanted to ask more. Wanted to know everything about this man who had appeared like a miracle in the desert, but she could feel him flagging behind her. His arm around her waist had loosened slightly, and when she glanced down she could see the fine tremor in his hand. The lack of water was taking its toll. Marcus, she said softly, you should have some of that water you saved. It is for emergencies, he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. This is an emergency. You are suffering. I have been more uncomfortable, Marcus said, attempting a light tone that didn't quite land. Besides, we are making good time. Another few hours and we will be in Abiquiu. I can last that long. But Josephine wasn't so sure. She had seen what dehydration could do, had felt its effects herself just an hour before. Marcus was a strong man, clearly accustomed to hardship, but even strong men had their limits. The thought of him collapsing because he had given her all his water was unbearable. "Please," she said, "just a small sip. For me, if not for yourself." Marcus sighed, a sound of resigned defeat. "You are stubborn, Miss Turner." "So I have been told." She felt him reach for the canteen, heard the slosh of water inside. There was indeed some left, though not much. He drank carefully, and Josephine could practically feel the relief that flooded through him as the moisture hit his system. "Thank you," he said after he had capped the canteen again, "though you should have saved it for yourself." "Any decent woman would have done the same," Josephine said, throwing his earlier words back at him. She felt rather than saw his smile. "Touché, Miss Turner. Touché." The landscape began to change as they traveled, subtle shifts that Marcus clearly recognized even if Josephine did not. The scrubland gave way to slightly greener terrain, with more trees dotting the hillsides and the suggestion of water somewhere nearby. The mountains that had seemed so distant before now loomed larger, their peaks touched with the gold of the lowering sun. Josephine found herself relaxing more fully against Marcus, her exhaustion finally catching up with her, now that immediate death no longer seemed imminent. His chest was solid behind her, rising and falling with each breath, and she could hear the steady beat of his heart through his shirt. There was something profoundly comforting about him that made her feel safer than she had in months. "You can sleep if you need to," Marcus said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I will keep you from falling." "I don't want to be a burden," Josephine protested weakly. "You are not a burden. You are a woman who survived 3 days alone in the desert. That takes strength, Miss Turner. Rest now. You have earned it." Permission granted, Josephine let her eyes drift closed. She didn't fall fully asleep, but rather into a strange, half-aware state where she could still feel the horse's movement beneath her, still hear the creak of leather and the distant call of a hawk, but where her mind drifted free from her body. She dreamed of water, of cool rivers and sweet wells, of rain falling on her upturned face. She dreamed of kind eyes the color of whiskey and strong arms that held her safe. When she opened her eyes again, the sun was much lower on the horizon and buildings had appeared in the distance. Abiquiu, she assumed, though from here it looked like little more than a collection of adobe structures clustered around what was probably a central plaza. But it was civilization, safety, and water. So much water. "Welcome back," Marcus said, and Josephine could hear the fatigue in his voice now, undisguised. "We are almost there." "How are you holding up?" she asked, craning her neck to try to see his face. "I will be fine once I can stick my head in a horse trough," Marcus admitted with a tired laugh, "but I have kept my word. I am getting you somewhere safe." As they drew closer to Abiquiu, Josephine could make out more details. It was a small town typical of the New Mexico territory with adobe buildings painted in shades of tan and brown, wooden awnings providing shade over walkways, and a church with a bell tower at one end of the plaza. A few people moved about in the cooling evening air, and Josephine could see horses tied to hitching posts outside what looked like a saloon. Marcus guided the paint down the main street, drawing curious looks from the townspeople they passed. Josephine was aware of how they must look, both covered in dust, her obviously in distress, him obviously exhausted. She wanted to explain, to tell these strangers that this man had saved her life at risk to his own, but her voice still felt too weak for such pronouncements. Marcus stopped in front of a building with a sign that read, "Dr. Samuel Harrison, Physician." He dismounted with visible effort, then reached up to help Josephine down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and Marcus caught her, supporting her weight as he guided her toward the door. "Doc Harrison is a good man," Marcus said. "He will take care of you." He pushed open the door and they entered a cool, dim interior that smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. A man looked up from a desk in the corner, middle-aged with wire-rimmed spectacles and graying hair. His eyes widened when he saw them. "Marcus Quinn," he said, standing quickly. "What in blazes happened to you two?" Found her in the desert, Marcus said, his words coming slower now. 3 days without water. She needs help, Doc. Dr. Harrison moved quickly, taking Josephine from Marcus and guiding her to an examination table. Good Lord, child, let us get a look at you. He glanced back at Marcus, who was leaning heavily against the door frame. And you don't look much better. When did you last drink water? Had some a few hours back, Marcus said. I'm fine. You are not fine. You are about to fall over. Sit down before I have 2 patients instead of 1. The doctor pointed at a chair, and Marcus, too tired to argue, complied. Dr. Harrison turned to call through a door at the back of the room. Margaret, bring water as much as we have and some broth if there is any on the stove. A woman appeared, gray-haired and efficient-looking, carrying a large pitcher and 2 cups. She poured water without asking questions, handing 1 cup to Marcus and bringing the other to Josephine. The doctor took it from her and held it to Josephine's lips himself, controlling her intake just as Marcus had done. Over the next hour, Dr. Harrison examined Josephine thoroughly, asking questions about her ordeal while he checked her pulse, her temperature, and the condition of her skin. He applied salve to her cracked lips and sunburned face, gave her water at carefully measured intervals, and finally pronounced that she would survive with rest and continued hydration. You are very lucky, Miss Turner, he said, cleaning his spectacles with a handkerchief. Another few hours and we would be having a very different conversation. As it is, you should recover fully, though you will want to stay out of the sun for the next few days and drink water constantly. I owe my life to Mr. Quinn, Josephine said, looking over at where Marcus sat slumped in the chair, his eyes closed. If he hadn't found me when he did. Yes, well, Marcus has a talent for being in the right place at the right time. Dr. Harrison moved over to examine Marcus, who opened his eyes with obvious effort. Though it seems he has put himself at considerable risk in the process. You gave her all your water, didn't you? She needed it more, Marcus said simply. Noble and foolish in equal measure, as usual. But the doctor's tone was affectionate. He checked Marcus over with the same thoroughness he had shown Josephine, then stepped back with a satisfied nod. You will be fine as well, though you need to drink slowly for the next several hours. No alcohol, just water and perhaps some food if your stomach can handle it. Margaret, who had been moving quietly in the background, brought forward 2 bowls of broth and a plate of bread. Eat, she ordered, in a tone that brooked no argument. Both of you. Josephine realized she was ravenous. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten, probably not since before she lost the wagon train. She ate slowly, mindful of the doctor's warnings about her system being in shock, but every spoonful of the warm, salty broth tasted like heaven. Across the room, Marcus was eating as well, though Josephine noticed how his hands shook slightly with exhaustion. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small smile, one that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with her recent ordeal. Now then, Dr. Harrison said, once they had both finished eating, Miss Turner, you need rest. Several days of it, preferably somewhere quiet. Do you have family in Abiquiu, or means to pay for a room? Josephine's heart sank. In her relief at being rescued, she had not thought about the practicalities of her situation. I have no family, she admitted, and no money. Everything I had was with the wagon train. The doctor frowned, clearly trying to think of a solution. Well, we cannot simply turn you out on the street, not in your condition. Margaret and I have a spare room. I suppose we could... She can stay at the ranch, Marcus interrupted, straightening in his chair. We have room, and my brother's wife would appreciate the female company. God knows she complains enough about being surrounded by cowboys all day. Marcus, you cannot just take in every stray you find, Dr. Harrison said, though he sounded more amused than critical. Why not? The ranch is big enough, and Miss Turner will need somewhere to stay while she recovers and figures out her next steps. Makes sense for that place to be somewhere she'll be looked after properly. Marcus looked at Josephine, and she saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. If that is acceptable to you, Miss Turner, I would not want to make you uncomfortable. Josephine knew she should probably refuse, should insist on finding some other solution that didn't involve imposing on strangers. But the truth was she had nowhere else to go, no one else who would take her in, and the thought of staying near Marcus filled her with a warmth she didn't want to examine too closely just yet. "I would be grateful," she said softly, "though I insist on earning my keep. I can cook, clean, help with whatever needs doing. I won't be a charity case." "Then it is settled," Marcus said, pushing himself to his feet with visible effort. "We will stay in town tonight, get proper rest and more water, then head to the ranch in the morning. Doc, can you recommend a hotel?" "The Silver Bell is clean and reasonable," Dr. Harrison said. "Tell Martha I sent you and she'll give you a fair rate. And Marcus?" He waited until the cowboy looked at him. "You did good today. Your father would be proud." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Emotion quickly masked, but Josephine caught it. "Thank you, Doc," was all he said. Getting to the Silver Bell required walking 3 buildings down, a distance that felt like miles to Josephine's exhausted body. Marcus stayed close beside her, ready to catch her if she stumbled, though she noticed he was moving stiffly himself, the day's ordeal having taken its toll. The hotel was indeed clean, with a matronly woman named Martha behind the desk, who took one look at them and seemed to understand without explanation that they had been through something harrowing. She gave them rooms on the 2nd floor side by side and sent up extra pitchers of water without being asked. Josephine's room was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in clean quilts, a washstand with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the main street. After Martha left, Josephine stood at the washstand for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The face that looked back at her was almost unrecognizable, sunburned to the point of blistering, lips cracked and swollen, eyes red-rimmed and surrounded by dark circles. Her hair was a tangled disaster, matted with dust and sweat. She had never looked worse in her entire life, and yet Marcus Quinn had looked at her with those warm brown eyes and seen someone worth saving. More than that, he had given her his water, had pushed himself to the brink of collapse to get her to safety, had offered her a place to stay without asking for anything in return. Who was this man? And why did the thought of him make her chest feel tight and fluttery at the same time? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Martha holding an armful of clothes. "I thought you might need something clean to wear," the older woman said kindly. "These were my daughter's before she married and moved to Santa Fe. They should fit you well enough." "I can't pay you," Josephine said, hating to admit it, but knowing it was true. "Did I ask you to? Mr. Quinn already paid for your room and any necessities you might need. Said to spare no expense." Martha pressed the clothes into Josephine's hands. "He also asked me to tell you that he is in the room next door if you need anything, but that you shouldn't feel obligated to talk tonight if you need to rest. He said you have been through enough and should do what feels right for you." Warmth flooded through Josephine again. Even in his own exhaustion, Marcus was thinking of her comfort, her needs. "He is very kind," she said, her voice catching slightly. "He is," Martha agreed. "The Quinn family has always been good people, Marcus especially. There are not many men who would do what he did today, giving up his water like that. You are lucky he found you, dear." "I know," Josephine whispered. "Believe me, I know." After Martha left, Josephine used the water in the pitcher to wash as best she could, scrubbing away days' worth of dust and grime until the water in the basin turned brown. She carefully worked the tangles from her hair, applied more of the salve Dr. Harrison had given her to her face and lips, then changed into one of the dresses Martha had provided. It was simple calico in a soft green color, and while it was slightly loose on her frame, it felt like the finest silk after days in her ruined traveling dress. She should sleep. Her body was screaming for it, every muscle aching with exhaustion. But instead, Josephine found herself standing at the door between her room and Marcus's, her hand raised to knock before she could talk herself out of it. He opened it almost immediately, as though he had been waiting nearby. He had cleaned up as well, she noticed, his face scrubbed free of dust, and his hair damp from washing. He had removed his vest and hat, standing now in just his shirt and trousers, and Josephine was struck by how young he looked, how vulnerable without his cowboy armor. Miss Turner, he said, and she could hear the concern in his voice. Is everything all right? Do you need something? I need to thank you properly, Josephine said. I don't think I really have yet, not in a way that means anything. You have thanked me several times, Marcus pointed out gently. You don't owe me anything more. I owe you everything, Josephine corrected. I owe you my life, Marcus. Without you, I would be dead in the desert right now. You gave up your water for a complete stranger. You pushed yourself past safe limits to get me here, and now you are offering me a place to stay at your ranch, a chance to start over. How do I even begin to repay that? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. You don't, he said finally. That is the point, Josephine. You don't repay kindness like it is a debt. You just accept it and maybe pass it along to someone else someday when they need it. The way he said her name, without the formal Miss Turner, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. She had never heard her name sound quite like that before, had never felt so seen, so truly acknowledged. Even so, she said softly, and I want you to know what it means to me. What you mean to me. Something shifted in the air between them, a charge like the moment before lightning strikes. Marcus took a small step forward, close enough now that Josephine could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could count the individual whiskers of his beard if she wanted to. Josephine, he said, her name barely more than a whisper. I need to tell you something, and you can think I'm crazy if you want, but I'm too tired to keep it to myself. He took a breath. From the moment I saw you out there in the desert, fighting to stay alive against impossible odds, something changed in me. I don't know how to explain it, don't have fancy words for it, but I knew, somehow I just knew, that finding you meant something. That you meant something. Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. I don't think you are crazy, she whispered, because I felt it too. Feel it too. When you gave me that water, when you held me on your horse, when you looked at me like I was worth saving even though I must have looked half dead. She trailed off, not sure how to put the enormity of her feelings into words. Marcus reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently tucked a strand of still damp hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and calloused and impossibly tender. You looked like the bravest person I had ever seen, he said, and you still do. They stood like that for a long moment, the world narrowing to just the two of them, to the feeling of his hand against her face, and the way his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person who had ever existed. Josephine wanted to kiss him, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised her. But she also knew they were both exhausted, both still recovering, both caught up in the intensity of what had happened. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow there would be time to explore these feelings, to see if this connection between them was real, or just the product of extraordinary circumstances. For now, it was enough to stand close, to feel the warmth of him, to know that she was not alone. You should rest, Marcus said finally, though he made no move to step away. You have been through hell today. So have you, Josephine pointed out, because of me. Worth it, Marcus said immediately, 1,000 times worth it. Now go, get some sleep. I will be right here if you need anything. Reluctantly, Josephine stepped back. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Josephine. She closed the door between their rooms, but stood there for a moment with her hand pressed against the wood, imagining him doing the same on the other side. Then finally she turned and made her way to the bed, climbing between the clean sheets with a sigh of pure relief. Sleep took her almost instantly, pulling her down into darkness. But this time, there were no nightmares of dying alone in the desert. Instead, she dreamed of whiskey-colored eyes and strong arms and a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility. The morning sun was gentler than the merciless glare of the desert, filtering through the curtains of Josephine's room with a golden glow that spoke of new beginnings. She woke slowly, her body still aching, but the desperate, life-threatening exhaustion of the previous day replaced with the simple tiredness of someone who had pushed themselves too hard and now needed time to heal. There was a knock on her door, soft and tentative. "Josephine, are you awake?" Marcus. Even through the door, even after just one day, his voice sent a thrill through her. "I am," she called, sitting up and finger-combing her hair into some semblance of order. "Come in." He entered carrying a tray with breakfast, eggs, toast, bacon, and a large glass of water. The sight of so much food and water made Josephine's eyes prickle with tears. "Martha insisted I bring this up," Marcus said, though the smile on his face suggested he had needed little convincing. "She said you need to eat a proper meal before we head to the ranch." "Thank you," Josephine said, accepting the tray and setting it on her lap. The smell of the food made her stomach growl audibly, and Marcus laughed. "I had the same reaction," he admitted, settling into the chair by the window. He looked better this morning, she noticed, the gray cast to his skin gone and his eyes brighter. Proper rest and water had done them both good. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired, but alive, thanks to you." Josephine bit into the toast, savoring the simple pleasure of food. "How far is it to your ranch?" "About 2 hours' ride, maybe a bit more at an easy pace. I figured we would take it slow, give you time to adjust. The last thing you need is to push yourself too hard and end up right back in Dr. Harrison's office." Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I should probably warn you, the ranch is not fancy. It is a working cattle operation, which means it can be rough around the edges. And the men who work for us, well, they are good people, but they are cowboys. They can be loud and crude sometimes." "Marcus, I just spent 3 days dying in the desert and then traveled with a wagon train for 2 months before that. I think I can handle some rowdy cowboys." Josephine paused, then added more softly, "Besides, I meant what I said last night. I want to earn my keep. Whatever you need done around the ranch, I can learn." "You don't have to," Marcus started, but Josephine cut him off. "Yes, I do. For my own sake, if not for yours, I need to feel useful. To feel like I am contributing something. Please, Marcus, let me help." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you take it easy for the first week at least. No heavy work until you are fully recovered. Agreed?" "Agreed." They left Abiquiu an hour later, Marcus's paint gelding loaded with supplies he had purchased in town, including proper food, extra water, and some additional clothes for Josephine that Martha had insisted she take. The townspeople watched them leave with open curiosity, and Josephine knew their story was probably already spreading through Abiquiu, growing more dramatic with each telling. The ride to the Quinn ranch was nothing like the desperate journey of the previous day. Marcus kept the paint to a gentle walk, pointing out landmarks as they traveled and telling Josephine about the land. She learned that the ranch had been in his family for 15 years, carved out of the harsh New Mexico territory through sheer determination and backbreaking work. His father had been a tough man, but a fair one, beloved by his sons and respected by his workers. His death 2 years ago had been sudden, a heart attack while out checking fence lines, and Marcus still carried the grief of it, though he tried to hide it. "He would have liked you," Marcus said at one point, his voice thoughtful. "Pa always appreciated people who were stubborn enough to survive against long odds. He came out here from Texas with nothing but a dream and a willingness to work himself to the bone. Built this ranch from the ground up." "He sounds like a remarkable man," Josephine said. "You must miss him terribly." "Every day," Marcus admitted. "But I try to honor his memory by keeping the ranch running the way he would have wanted. It is not always easy, especially with beef prices fluctuating and rustlers becoming more of a problem, but we manage." The ranch, when it finally came into view, was both more and less than Josephine had expected. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides, weathered but well-maintained. Beyond it stood a barn, several outbuildings, and a series of corrals where horses moved lazily in the morning sun. In the distance, Josephine could see cattle dotting the hills, dark shapes against the golden grass. It looked like hard work. It looked like home. As they approached, people began to emerge from various buildings. A younger man, who could only be Marcus's brother based on the family resemblance, came out of the barn wiping his hands on a rag. A petite woman with auburn hair appeared on the porch of the main house, her hand shading her eyes as she watched them approach. Several cowboys stopped what they were doing to stare, their curiosity obvious. Marcus dismounted first, then helped Josephine down. Her legs were steadier today, though she was grateful for his steadying hand. The young man from the barn approached, his eyes flicking between Marcus and Josephine with obvious interest. "Jake," Marcus said by way of greeting, "this is Miss Josephine Turner. Josephine, my brother Jacob." "Everyone calls me Jake," the younger Quinn said, extending his hand. He was perhaps 23, with the same brown eyes as his brother but a more carefree expression. "And what is this about you giving away all your water to a stranger and nearly dying yourself? The town is buzzing with the story." "The town should mind its own business," Marcus said, but there was no heat in his words. "Where is Catherine?" "Right here, and dying of curiosity," the auburn-haired woman said, descending the porch steps with a grace that spoke of good breeding. She was probably around Josephine's age, pretty in a delicate way that seemed at odds with the roughness of ranch life. "I am Catherine Quinn, Jake's wife, and you must be the miracle woman Marcus rescued from the desert." "Hardly a miracle," Josephine said, suddenly self-conscious under the scrutiny of these strangers who would be her hosts. "Just lucky that Marcus found me when he did." "Lucky for us too," Catherine said warmly, taking Josephine's hand in both of hers. "It gets terribly lonely out here with only these men for company. I am thrilled to have another woman around. Come inside, you look exhausted. Marcus, stop hovering over her like a mother hen and bring her things to the guest room." The interior of the ranch house was cool and surprisingly comfortable, with thick adobe walls that kept out the heat and furniture that, while simple, was well made and lovingly maintained. Catherine led Josephine through a main living area with a large fireplace, down a hallway, and into a bedroom that was small but clean, with a window overlooking the horse corrals. "This was Marcus and Jake's mother's sewing room before she passed," Catherine explained, smoothing the quilt on the bed. "But we have been using it for guests for the past year. I hope it will be comfortable for you." "It is perfect," Josephine said honestly. After sleeping rough for days and then in a hotel room, the idea of having a space of her own, even temporarily, felt like an impossible luxury. Catherine studied her with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Marcus told Jake a little bit of what happened when he rode in this morning before going to fetch you from town. 3 days alone in the desert. Is that true?" "It is," Josephine confirmed, and found herself telling the story again, though this time with less of the raw terror that had colored yesterday's telling. Catherine listened with wide eyes, occasionally gasping or pressing her hand to her mouth. "How terrifying," she said when Josephine finished. "But you survived, and that takes real strength. Marcus was right to bring you here. You are welcome to stay as long as you need, truly." "I told Marcus I would work for my keep," Josephine said. "I meant that. Whatever you need done around the house or ranch, I am happy to help." "We can discuss that after you have had a few days to recover," Catherine said firmly. "For now you rest. I will bring you some lunch in a few hours, and if you need anything at all, just call out. Someone is always around." She paused at the door, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You know, I have known Marcus Quinn for 3 years now, since I married Jake, and I have never once seen him look at a woman the way he looked at you just now. Whatever is happening between you two, it is something special. Don't let it slip away." Before Josephine could respond, Catherine was gone, closing the door softly behind her. Josephine sat on the bed, her mind whirling. Was it that obvious? Could everyone see the connection between her and Marcus, this strange, intense bond that had formed in the space of a single day? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? The next few days passed in a blur of rest and recovery. True to her word, Catherine refused to let Josephine do any real work, insisting that she focus on regaining her strength. Dr. Harrison rode out from town on the 3rd day to check on both Josephine and Marcus, pronouncing them both well on the way to full recovery. "Though you, Miss Turner, will want to be careful in the sun for at least another few weeks," the doctor cautioned. "Your skin took quite a beating. And continue drinking plenty of water? I cannot stress that enough." Josephine spent her time getting to know the rhythms of ranch life. She learned that Marcus was up before dawn every day, overseeing the cowboys as they rode out to check on the cattle, repair fences, and handle the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. Jake, as Marcus had mentioned, was less involved in the day-to-day operations, though he pulled his weight when needed. He spent most of his time working with the horses, breaking in new mounts, and training the ranch's cow ponies. Catherine became a fast friend, grateful for female companionship in this world of men. She had been raised in Santa Fe, the daughter of a merchant, and had married Jake Quinn in a love match that had surprised both families. She was adapting to ranch life with determination, though she admitted to Josephine that it was harder than she had expected. "I knew it would be different from city life," Catherine confided one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas, "but I didn't realize how isolated it would feel sometimes. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and town is a 2-hour ride. There are days when I feel like I'm living on another planet." "Do you regret it?" Josephine asked. "Marrying Jake and coming here?" "Not for a moment," Catherine said firmly. "I love Jake more than I thought it was possible to love another person. And this ranch, for all its challenges, is growing on me. There's something beautiful about the land out here, something wild and free that you don't find in the city." She paused, giving Josephine a sly look. "But I imagine you're more interested in hearing about Marcus than about my musings on ranch life." Josephine felt heat creep into her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Please," Catherine said with a laugh, "I have eyes. Josephine. And so does everyone else on this ranch. Marcus cannot go 5 minutes without finding an excuse to check on you. Yesterday I caught him standing outside your bedroom door for a full minute before he finally knocked. He is smitten, completely and utterly." "We barely know each other," Josephine protested weakly. "It has only been a few days." "Sometimes a few days is all it takes," Catherine said wisely. "When you know, you know. I knew I would marry Jake after our second conversation. My mother thought I was insane, but I was right." She set down her bowl of peas and turned to face Josephine fully. "The question is, how do you feel about him?" Josephine was quiet for a long moment, trying to organize the tumult of emotions Marcus stirred in her. "I feel like he sees me," she said finally. "Really sees me. Not just who I am supposed to be or what I can do for him, but who I actually am underneath. When he looks at me, I feel like I matter, like I am important." "That is because you do matter and you are important," Catherine said gently, "at least to him. So what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," Josephine admitted. "I don't want to presume anything. Maybe he is just being kind, repaying what he sees as a debt for." "Josephine," Catherine interrupted, "Marcus gave you his water in the middle of the desert. He could have died from that decision. That is not kindness. That is not debt. That is love, or at least the beginning of it." The word love hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Could it really be love? This fast, this intense, this undeniable? Everything Josephine had been taught said that love took time to develop, that it grew slowly from friendship and compatibility. But what she felt for Marcus didn't feel slow or gradual. It felt like lightning, like fire, like coming home to a place she had never been but had always been searching for. That evening, as the sun set over the New Mexico hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Josephine found Marcus in the barn. He was brushing down his horse, the movements methodical and soothing. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that lit his face made her heart skip. "Josephine," he said, setting down the brush, "everything all right?" "I wanted to talk to you," she said, suddenly nervous, "if you have a moment." "For you?" "Always." Marcus led her to a bench near the barn entrance where they could watch the sunset. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Josephine gathered her courage. "I have been thinking," she started, then had to stop and start again. "I have been thinking about what happens next. For me, I mean. I can't stay here indefinitely living off your charity. It is not charity, Marcus said immediately, and you can stay as long as you want. The ranch is big enough. But I need to build a life, Marcus. I need to figure out what comes next. And I realized I have been so focused on surviving, first my family's death, then the journey west, then the desert, that I haven't thought about what I actually want. What would make me happy? Marcus turned to face her, his expression serious. And have you figured it out? What would make you happy? This was it, the moment of truth. Josephine took a deep breath and met his eyes. I think I have, or at least I am starting to. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. Marcus, I know this is fast, and I know we have only known each other for a few days, but I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. When I was dying out there in the desert, I had accepted it. I was ready to let go. But then you appeared, and you gave me your water, and you held me safe. And suddenly I had a reason to fight again. You gave me that reason. Marcus's grip on her hand tightened. Josephine, let me finish, she said softly. I am not asking you for anything, not making any demands. I just needed you to know that you changed something in me, that for the first time in a very long time, I am thinking about the future with hope instead of dread. And that future, whatever it looks like, I want you in it. For a moment, Marcus was silent, and Josephine felt panic flutter in her chest. Had she misread everything? Was Catherine wrong about his feelings? But then Marcus was moving, closing the distance between them, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek just as he had that first night in the hotel. Josephine Turner, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have been trying to find the right words, the right time to tell you this. But the truth is there is never a perfect time, and I am not good with fancy speeches, so I am just going to say it plain. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling the moment I saw you out there, refusing to give up even when death was staring you in the face. Maybe it was when you insisted I drink water even though you needed it more. Maybe it was one of the 100 small moments since then, but it is happening, and I don't want it to stop. Marcus, Josephine whispered, his name a prayer and a promise. I know it is fast, Marcus continued. I know people will say we are crazy, that you can't fall in love in less than a week, but I don't care what people say. I know what I feel, and I know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret the moment I found you in that desert. Tears were streaming down Josephine's face now, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. I could never regret that moment, she said. It gave me you. Marcus leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but pulling away was the last thing on Josephine's mind. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and perfect, a kiss that tasted of new beginnings and second chances. Josephine melted into it, her hand coming up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. They broke apart eventually, both breathing hard, their foreheads resting together. So what does this mean? Marcus asked. For us, for the future? It means we figure it out together, Josephine said. I will stay here, work on the ranch, build a life, and we will take this one day at a time, let it grow into whatever it is meant to be. I like the sound of that, Marcus said, and kissed her again. They told Jake and Catherine that night over dinner, though their announcement was met with knowing smiles rather than surprise. Finally, Jake said, raising his glass in a toast. I was wondering how long you two were going to dance around each other. It has been less than a week, Marcus protested, and in that week, you have checked on her approximately 400 times, stared at her during every meal, and smiled more than you have in the entire 2 years since Pa died, Jake pointed out. We are not blind, brother. Catherine reached across the table to squeeze Josephine's hand. I'm so happy for you both, she said warmly. This ranch could use more love in it. The following months were some of the happiest of Josephine's life. She threw herself into ranch work with determination, learning to cook for large groups of hungry cowboys, to help Catherine with the endless tasks of maintaining the household, and even to ride well enough to sometimes accompany Marcus on shorter trips around the property. She learned the names of all the ranch hands, gruff men with hearts of gold, who accepted her presence with minimal fuss once they saw how hard she was willing to work. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and late nights, the constant battle against weather and predators, and the simple challenge of keeping hundreds of cattle alive and healthy in harsh territory. And through it all, her relationship with Marcus deepened and grew. They stole moments together whenever they could, talking for hours on the porch after everyone else had gone to bed, riding out together to check fence lines, and stealing kisses in the shadow of canyon walls, learning each other's hopes and dreams and fears. Marcus told her about growing up on the ranch, about the fierce pride his father had taken in building something lasting, about his own dreams of expanding the operation and maybe even starting a horse breeding program alongside the cattle. Josephine told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents and siblings lost to cholera, about the terrible loneliness of being the last one left. "You are not alone anymore," Marcus told her one night as they sat watching the stars wheel overhead. "You have me and Jake and Catherine and this whole ranch full of people who have come to care about you. You have a family again, Josephine, if you want it." "I want it," Josephine whispered. "I want all of it. I want this life, this place, these people. I want you, Marcus Quinn, every single day for the rest of my life." Marcus turned to her, reaching into his pocket. "Then I guess it is a good thing I have this." He pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small stone that caught the starlight. "It was my mother's. Pa gave it to her when they married, and she wore it every day until she died. I have been carrying it around for 2 weeks now, trying to find the perfect moment to ask you, but I realized there is no perfect moment. There is just now, and us, and this feeling I have that you are the person I have been waiting for my whole life." He slid off the porch steps and knelt in the dust, holding the ring up to her. "Josephine Turner, will you marry me? Will you stay here on this ranch and build a life with me? Will you let me spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift you are?" "Yes," Josephine said, the word bursting out of her before he had even finished. "Yes, Marcus, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her down into a kiss that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Josephine looked down at the ring on her hand, overwhelmed by the reality of it. She was engaged. She was going to marry Marcus Quinn. She was going to spend the rest of her life on this ranch in New Mexico, a place that had been completely unknown to her just a few short months ago. And she had never been happier. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Abiquiu with Dr. Harrison giving Josephine away since she had no family of her own. Catherine stood up as her matron of honor, and Jake served as Marcus's best man. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with half the town in attendance to witness the marriage of the cowboy who had saved a woman from the desert and the woman who had stolen his heart in return. Josephine wore a dress that Catherine had helped her sew, white with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Marcus wore his best suit, dark and serious, though his eyes never left Josephine's face during the entire ceremony. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. The cowboys and townspeople mingled freely, drinking and dancing and celebrating the union of two people who had found each other against all odds. As the sun began to set, Marcus took Josephine's hand and led her out to the middle of the makeshift dance floor. "Mrs. Quinn," he said softly, and Josephine felt a thrill at hearing her new name. "May I have this dance?" "Always," she replied, stepping into his arms. They swayed together to the music of a fiddle and guitar, surrounded by friends and family, but lost in a world of their own. "Happy?" Marcus asked, his lips close to her ear. Happier than I ever thought possible, Josephine replied honestly. When I was out there in the desert dying, I never imagined this. I never imagined you or this life or this happiness. You saved me, Marcus, in every possible way. We saved each other, Marcus corrected. You gave me a reason to smile again, a reason to think about the future instead of just surviving day to day. You brought joy back into this house, into my life. If anyone did the saving, it was you. As they danced, Josephine thought about the twisting path that had led her here. The tragedy of losing her family, the desperate hope of the wagon train, the terrible ordeal of being lost in the desert, and then the miracle of Marcus finding her. Any one of those things could have gone differently. She could have died with her family. She could have stayed in Missouri. She could have never lost the wagon train or lost it in a different place where no one would have found her in time. But instead, everything had conspired to bring her here, to this moment, to this man. And looking up into Marcus's face, seeing the love shining in his eyes, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing. Every hardship, every loss, every moment of suffering had been worth it to end up here, in his arms, building a life together. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. A drought in the late summer tested the ranch's resources, forcing them to make difficult decisions about which cattle to keep and which to sell. A bout of illness swept through the bunkhouse, leaving half the cowboys unable to work for nearly 2 weeks. And there were the usual struggles of two people learning to live together, to compromise and communicate and build a partnership that could weather any storm. But through it all, Marcus and Josephine faced everything together. They worked side by side, supported each other through the difficult times, and celebrated the victories no matter how small. Slowly but surely, the Quinn Ranch began to thrive again, no longer just surviving but truly flourishing under their combined efforts. Josephine discovered she had a talent for managing the ranch's finances, keeping meticulous records of expenses and income that allowed them to make smarter decisions about how to allocate their resources. Marcus, freed from the burden of trying to handle everything himself, was able to focus on what he did best, working with the cattle and horses, managing the cowboys, and slowly expanding their operation. Jake and Catherine welcomed a daughter in the spring of 1879, a tiny thing they named Sarah after Marcus and Jake's mother. Josephine held the baby for the first time and felt a yearning so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. She wanted this, she realized. Wanted a child with Marcus. Wanted to build a family and fill this house with the sound of children's laughter. She brought it up with Marcus that night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest and his arms around her. "I want to have a baby," she said softly. "I want us to have a family." Marcus's arms tightened around her. "I want that too," he admitted. "Want to see you round with our child. Want to teach a son or daughter to ride, want to build something that will outlast us both." "Then let's do it," Josephine said, tilting her head up to kiss him. "Let's build our family." It took time, longer than either of them expected. Months passed with no result, and Josephine began to worry that perhaps the ordeal in the desert had damaged her in some way she didn't understand. Dr. Harrison assured her that these things sometimes took time, that she should be patient, but patience had never been one of Josephine's strengths. Finally, in the winter of 1880, Josephine's monthly courses failed to arrive. Then another month passed, and another, and the morning sickness began. Dr. Harrison confirmed what she had already suspected. She was pregnant, due to deliver sometime in early summer. Marcus's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down with a look of panic. "Should I not have done that? Did I hurt you? Did I hurt the baby?" Josephine laughed, pulling him close. "We are fine, Marcus. Pregnant women are not made of glass." "Still," Marcus said, his hand coming to rest protectively on her still flat stomach. "We should be careful. You should rest more, not work so hard." Marcus Quinn, if you try to wrap me in cotton wool for the next 6 months, I will make your life miserable, Josephine warned, but she was smiling. The fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the wonder and fear and love all mixed together, made her fall in love with him all over again. The pregnancy was not easy. Josephine was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep down more than dry toast and weak tea. Catherine was endlessly helpful, having gone through her own pregnancy just a year before, offering advice and support and a sympathetic ear. As Josephine's belly grew, the work she could do around the ranch became more limited, a fact that frustrated her even though she understood the necessity. Marcus was simultaneously the best and worst possible husband during this time. He was attentive to a fault, constantly checking on her, making sure she was comfortable, bringing her things she hadn't asked for but secretly wanted. But he also worried incessantly, seeing danger in every shadow, convinced that something would go wrong. "You need to relax," Josephine told him one night in their bedroom, watching him pace back and forth. "All this worrying is not good for you or for me." "I just want you both to be safe," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. "I can't lose you, Josephine. I can't." Josephine patted the bed beside her and waited until he sat down. She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly, right where the baby had been kicking all evening. Marcus's eyes widened as he felt the strong, insistent movements beneath his palm. "Feel that?" Josephine said softly. "That is our child, Marcus. Strong and healthy and determined to make their presence known. Everything is going to be fine." Marcus kept his hand on her belly, feeling each kick and flutter, and slowly the tension drained from his shoulders. "How did you get so wise?" he asked. "I married a good man who teaches me every day what it means to be brave," Josephine replied. Their son was born on a sweltering day in early July 1880. After a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours and left Josephine exhausted but triumphant. Dr. Harrison had ridden out from town to assist, setting up in their bedroom while Marcus paced holes in the porch outside, driven half mad by the sounds of his wife's pain and unable to do anything to help. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Dr. Harrison wrapped him in a clean blanket and carried him to the door. "You have a son, Marcus. A healthy boy with a good set of lungs on him." Marcus pushed past the doctor into the bedroom, his eyes finding Josephine immediately. She was pale and sweaty, her hair plastered to her face, but she was smiling as Catherine helped her sit up against the pillows. The baby was in her arms, and Marcus had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. "Come meet your son," Josephine said, her voice tired but full of joy. Marcus approached almost reverently, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. He looked down at the tiny face, at the miniature fingers curled into fists, at the eyes that were trying to focus on this strange new world. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered. "Josephine, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Josephine asked. They had discussed names for months, but had never settled on anything definite. Marcus thought for a moment, then said, Matthew Henry Quinn, after both our fathers." Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes. Her father's name had been Henry, and the idea of honoring his memory in this way, of giving their son a connection to the grandfather he would never meet, touched her deeply. "Matthew Henry Quinn," she repeated. "It is perfect." Young Matthew was a demanding baby, colicky and fussy for the first few months, but he brought a joy to the Quinn household that had been missing before. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, taking shifts, walking the floor with the crying infant at night, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with an expression of wonder that never quite faded. Jake and Catherine Sarah was 2 years older than Matthew, and they became constant companions as they grew, more like siblings than cousins. The ranch house, once quiet except for the business of running the operation, now rang with children's laughter and the patter of small feet. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper, helped by several years of good rainfall and strong beef prices. They were able to hire more cowboys, expand their herd, and even start Marcus's long-dreamed of horse breeding program. Josephine proved to be a natural at training the young horses, patient and firm in equal measure, and the Quinn Ranch soon gained a reputation for producing quality mounts. When Matthew was 3 years old, Josephine found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and she carried the baby with a confidence that had been lacking the first time. Marcus was still protective, but had learned to trust that his wife was stronger than she looked. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1884, delivered on a morning when the desert had bloomed with unexpected wildflowers after a night of rain. She came into the world quietly, barely crying, her eyes wide and curious as she took in her surroundings. They named her Lily Margaret Quinn, Lily for the flowers blooming outside and Margaret for Marcus's mother. With 2 children, the ranch house was louder and more chaotic than ever, but neither Marcus nor Josephine would have changed a thing. Matthew was a serious child, thoughtful and careful, already showing signs of his father's quiet strength. Lily was her opposite, bold and adventurous, climbing before she could barely walk and giving her parents constant heart attacks with her fearless explorations. One evening when Matthew was 7 and Lily 4, Josephine sat on the porch watching Marcus teach their son to rope a fence post. Matthew's face was scrunched up in concentration, his small hands working the lariat exactly as his father had shown him. Behind them, Lily was attempting to rope the barn cat, with about as much success as one would expect, which is to say none at all. Catherine came out to join Josephine, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Remember when we used to have quiet evening?" she asked with a laugh, handing 1 cup to Josephine. "Vaguely," Josephine replied, accepting the coffee gratefully, "though I would not trade this chaos for anything." "Neither would I," Catherine agreed. She watched her own children, Sarah and her younger brother Thomas, playing in the yard. "We have built something good here, haven't we? Something worth all the struggle it took to get here." Josephine thought about that, about the long journey that had brought her to this moment, the loss of her family, the dangerous trip west, the terrible days in the desert, and then Marcus appearing like a miracle, giving her his water, giving her a future. So much had changed since that day 7 years ago, but the core of it remained the same. Marcus had saved her life, and in doing so, had given her everything. "We have built something extraordinary," Josephine said softly, and it all started with 1 act of kindness from a man who could not stand by and watch someone suffer. As if hearing his name in her thoughts, Marcus looked over and caught her eye. Even from across the yard, even after 7 years of marriage, the look he gave her made her heart flutter. It was a look that said she was loved, cherished, valued beyond measure. It was a look that said he would give her his water again, would make the same choice every single time, would sacrifice anything to keep her safe. Josephine smiled back, letting all her own love and gratitude show on her face. She raised her coffee cup in a silent toast, and Marcus grinned, that same crooked smile that had first appeared the day he found her, the smile that said she was his miracle as much as he was hers. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the usual mix of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. There were more droughts, more hard winters, more challenges that tested the ranch's resilience. Jake and Catherine had 2 more children, filling their house to bursting. Dr. Harrison grew older, eventually training a younger doctor to help him with his rounds. Abiquiu grew as well, attracting new settlers and businesses, becoming less of a frontier town and more of a proper community. Through it all, Marcus and Josephine faced everything side by side, their partnership deepening with each passing year. They were not just husband and wife, but true partners in every sense, running the ranch together, raising their children together, building a legacy that would outlast them both. Matthew grew into a young man who was the image of his father, quiet and strong and utterly dependable. He took to ranch work with natural aptitude, and it was clear to everyone that he would be the one to take over the operation when the time came. Lily, true to her adventurous nature, was more interested in the horses than the cattle, spending hours in the corrals working with the young mounts and developing an almost supernatural ability to gentle even the most spirited animals. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Josephine back out to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. It was a bright spring day, nothing like the merciless heat of that long ago July, and the desert was alive with blooms and birdsong. They stood together looking out over the landscape, and Marcus said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had ridden a different direction that day, if I had been an hour later or a mile further north?" "I try not to," Josephine admitted, "because the answer is too terrible to contemplate." "I think about it sometimes," Marcus said. "Think about how close I came to never finding you, never knowing you existed, and it terrifies me, Josephine, because you are everything. You are my whole world." Josephine turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. There was gray at his temples now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still the same man who had given her his canteen without hesitation, still the same man who had held her safe on his horse and promised to get her somewhere safe. "But you did find me," she said firmly. "You rode in exactly the right direction at exactly the right time. You gave me your water and saved my life, and I will be grateful for that every single day for the rest of my life. But Marcus, you have given me so much more than survival. You have given me love and family and a home and a purpose. You have given me everything I never knew I needed." Marcus pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest. "I love you, Josephine Quinn, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "And I love you," Josephine whispered back. "Always." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms in the place where their story had begun. The desert stretched out around them, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving, but they were not afraid. They had survived worse than anything the land could throw at them. They had survived loss and hardship and the terrible vulnerability of opening their hearts to another person. And they had not just survived. They had thrived. They had built something lasting and beautiful from the dust and heat and desperation of that first day. They had created a family, a home, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. As they rode back to the ranch, Josephine looked ahead to where their house sat nestled in the valley, smoke rising from the chimney, children playing in the yard. She thought about Matthew and Lily, about Jake and Catherine and their family, about all the cowboys and workers who depended on the ranch for their livelihoods. She thought about the life she and Marcus had built together, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. And she knew, with the certainty that had guided her through the darkest moments of her life, that this was exactly where she was meant to be, that the terrible ordeal in the desert, as awful as it had been, had led her to her true home, that Marcus Quinn, the cowboy who had given her his water and asked for nothing in return, was not just her husband, but her soulmate, the other half of her heart. Their story had started with an act of selfless kindness in the merciless heat of the New Mexico desert, but it had become so much more than that. It had become a testament to the power of love, to the strength of partnership, to the beautiful things that could grow even in the harshest environments when tended with care and devotion. And as Josephine rode beside her husband toward the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had tamed, she knew that their story, which had begun with water shared in the desert, would end only when their last breaths left their bodies, and even then, it would live on in the children and grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward. Years continued to flow like water through their hands, precious and irreplaceable. Josephine and Marcus grew older, their hair turning silver, their movements slowing, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing season, tempered by time and trial, into something unbreakable. Matthew married at 25, bringing home a spirited woman named Emma who fit seamlessly into the Quinn family. They gave Marcus and Josephine their first grandchild, a boy with Josephine's dark eyes and Marcus's quiet strength. Lily, ever the free spirit, waited until she was 28 to marry, choosing a horse trainer from Colorado who understood her need for adventure and independence. The ranch continued to prosper under Matthew's management, with Marcus stepping back to an advisory role and spending more time teaching his grandchildren to ride, to rope, to respect the land that had given them so much. Josephine took up painting in her later years, capturing the beauty of the New Mexico landscape in watercolors that hung throughout the ranch house, permanent testaments to her love for this place that had become her home. On a warm evening in the summer of 1918, 40 years after that fateful day in the desert, Marcus and Josephine sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the hills. They were in their 70s now, their bodies worn by decades of hard work, but their hands were still intertwined, fingers laced together as naturally as breathing. "Do you have any regrets?" Marcus asked, his voice roughened by age, but still warm, still capable of making Josephine's heart flutter. "Not a single one," Josephine replied without hesitation. "You?" "Only that I don't have another 40 years to spend with you," Marcus said, squeezing her hand gently. Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as familiar as the beat of her own heart. "We have had a good life, Marcus Quinn. A wonderful life. Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was stumbling through that desert, convinced I was going to die alone." "You were never meant to die alone," Marcus said. "You were meant to find me, and I was meant to find you, and we were meant to build all of this together." He gestured at the ranch spread out before them, at the house full of family, at the land they had poured their lives into. "Do you ever wish you had kept that water for yourself?" Josephine asked, a question she had wondered about but never quite dared to voice before. "That you had played it safe instead of risking your life for a stranger?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was full of emotion. "Josephine, giving you that water was the easiest decision I ever made, because the alternative, riding past you, leaving you there to die, was impossible. The moment I saw you, something in me knew that you were important, that you mattered, that whatever happened, I had to make sure you survived, and I have never, not for one single second, regretted that choice." Tears slipped down Josephine's cheeks. Happy tears. Grateful tears. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved," she whispered, "and I hope, in my own way, I have saved you too." "You have," Marcus assured her. "You brought light back into my life when I thought it had gone out forever. You gave me purpose and joy and a future worth building. You saved me, Josephine, every bit as much as I saved you." They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple and gold. Around them, the ranch settled into evening, the sounds of family and home creating a symphony of contentment. Grandchildren laughed in the yard. Dinner preparations clattered in the kitchen. Horses whinnied softly in the corrals. It was a perfect moment, a culmination of 40 years of love and work and dedication. And as Marcus and Josephine sat together watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, they knew that their story, which had begun with water shared in desperate circumstances, had become something eternal, something that would outlive their mortal bodies and live on in the family they had created and the love they had nurtured. Their legacy was not just the ranch, though it was thriving and would continue to thrive under Matthew's careful stewardship. Their legacy was not just their children and grandchildren, though they were wonderful and would carry the Quinn name forward with honor. Their legacy was the simple truth that love, real love, the kind that makes you give your water to a dying stranger, the kind that holds you through the hardest times and celebrates with you in the good times, that kind of love can change everything. Marcus and Josephine Quinn lived for several more years, growing old together with grace and gratitude. When Marcus finally passed in his sleep at the age of 76, Josephine mourned him deeply, but without regret, knowing they had made the most of every single day they had been given. She followed him 2 years later, dying peacefully in the bedroom they had shared for nearly 5 decades, surrounded by children and grandchildren who all carried pieces of the love story that had started in the desert. The Quinn Ranch continued for generations, each new family adding their own chapters to the story while honoring the foundation that Marcus and Josephine had built. And in the main house, in a place of honor above the fireplace, hung a painting Josephine had made of the desert where Marcus had found her, a canteen prominently featured in the foreground, a reminder of the moment when everything changed, when two souls found each other against impossible odds and chose to build something beautiful together. It was a love story for the ages, started by a single act of selfless kindness and nurtured into something that would endure forever. It was the story of Marcus Quinn, who gave his water without hesitation, and Josephine Turner, who was saved not just by water but by love, who saved in return the man who had saved her, creating between them a bond that death itself could not break. And if you listened carefully on warm summer evenings, when the wind blew just right across the New Mexico hills, you could almost hear their laughter still echoing across the land they had loved, a reminder that some stories never truly end, but live on forever in the hearts of those who remember.